If we can all take our seats, I think we're ready to begin. Good morning. I'm Linda Trout. I'm the co-vice president of the League this year, and I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. It's supposed to be a beautiful weekend, and so I appreciate your starting out with us. Just as a reminder, the League is a grassroots nonprofit organization grounded in our nonpartisan policy, meaning we neither support nor oppose any candidate or political party at any level of government. This protects our 501c3 status. Let us be leaders in civility and in the political arena. Our mission is to defend democracy and empower voters. We continue our efforts to engage and educate voters on upcoming elections and public policy through programs like today's. While we aren't partisan, we are political. Our League has been actively involved in federal, state, and local government public policy for more than 71 years by our long-standing political statements. We are following through with that today because we have a topic that you find in the news every day in one form or another. It's there. It is the important issue of affordable housing in Johnson County. We have three people who are experts in various who are experts in various aspects of this issue. If you have questions for our panel, please use the cards that are on the chair and pass them to the end. We will ask them as time permits. We're pleased to welcome Megan Foreman, who is the coordinator of the Johnson County Housing Services, a division of the Johnson County Planning, Housing, and Community Development. Christy Brofman, the Executive Director of the United Services of Johnson County, a nonprofit organization, and John Burkle, the Director of Residential Development for Hunt Midwest, a privately held real estate development company. Megan, thank you for agreeing to moderate this program.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for... Is my mic on? We good? Thank you for having us this morning. My name is Megan Foreman. I'm the housing coordinator for Johnson County. So actually our housing services division, which is your sort of ongoing services like housing choice vouchers, home repair, those sorts of services, are things that the county has done for a long time. And Heather McNeve is the person that runs that. My position was actually created a couple of years ago in an attempt by the Board of County Commissioners, who's very interested in housing, in really seeing what else could be done to move the needle and to think a little bit bigger on some of these issues. So if you'll move to the slide with the, yep, here we go. This is, I apologize, these slides are gonna be a little bit challenging to read, but the thing that I want you to mostly take away from this, and to also sort of center yourself when we talk about policy options or other innovative ideas in this housing continuum. So the idea really is that it goes from sort of chronically unhoused or homeless, folks who have a whole lot of barriers and challenges to staying stably housed, and moves through people experiencing temporary or sporadic homelessness, the housing that might be needed for vulnerable populations, so folks who struggle perhaps with mental illness or some sort of physical disability, or perhaps just low income, all of those sorts of different things that may make you a little bit more vulnerable. And then we've got cost burden renters. So these are folks who normally would be in the rental market, but just that income isn't high enough, and more, and Christy will get into the data, but more and more we're seeing that cost burden hit folks who in the past would not have been considered cost burden just because the cost of housing is increasing so much. And then we have those potential homeowners, so people who maybe are ready to get into the home ownership market but have some challenges there. And then your cost burdened homeowners. So when I say cost burdened, I also mean people who are spending more than 30% of their income, their total income, on housing. So We know that when people spend more of their income than about 30% on housing, it takes away from other aspects of their life. It makes it more challenging to pay for healthcare, pay for education, pay for other services that they may need. So I just want to kind of ground you in this housing continuum and let you know that that's sort of how the county thinks about the different programs and services that we've got. And I will invite these other folks to introduce themselves. We're going to start with John Burkle and then move over to Christy.
Can I just make sure people can hear? Can everybody hear okay?
John, yell.
And I think when you talk to the left, we can hear you better than when you talk to the right.
Interesting.
Can you hear me now? Yes? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's a little hot. Okay. Okay. My name is John Burkle. I'm the Director of Residential Development for Hunt Midwest. Been at Hunt Midwest for 11 years. I've been working in housing for 35 years. My first beginnings through architecture school, planning, development of those types of projects for 15 years. And then I went to, next slide, so that's some of the work I did while I was at Gould Evans and some other projects. Went to work then for one of my clients, which was a nonprofit developer in KCK called City Vision. Projects like that is what we developed. We did everything from historic tax credits to low-income housing tax credits, home funds. We got a lot of people in that 80% AMI into purchasing of homes. We did art housing. We did a lot of different types of housing to create for unbankable people like artists and things like that to get them into housing. And next slide. So for the last 11 years, I've been at Hunt Midwest, so the projects that we've been doing have been a little bit larger. That's what we do. But it gives me a really good perspective on everything from the design, the planning, the nonprofit work, and then all the way into the market rate projects. It's given me a good perspective. So that's hopefully I bring some thoughts to this.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me okay? My name is Christy Boffman. I'm Executive Director for calm down, Christy, United Community Services of Johnson County. UCS has been around for almost 60 years, and we have kind of an interesting footprint in Johnson County. I won't go into all of it, but I'll kind of talk a little bit about how we really illuminate needs and issues in Johnson County through research and data analysis. So we will use data, numbers, to really bring up issues in our community that are challenging residents who live here. And then once we kind of have that, we do kind of what we call build the narrative. And we launch advocacy around those issues, and we really mobilize people to make change that we need in our community. And so you may remember the Johnson County Housing Study that we implemented in 2020 and released in 2021, and our Housing for All Toolkit. These are two projects that UCS did that really began with research and data analysis that showed us that we really were beginning to have a problem with affordable housing in Johnson County. This is way back in 2017. And we used that data to really mobilize people around this issue, and we're still doing that now. Now, in the past, I want to talk just a little bit about our public policy advocacy. In the past, our approach to public policy advocacy was basically we would have a legislative luncheon with our Johnson County delegates once a year, usually in February or March, and we try to change minds of our legislators at that time, which is completely ridiculous, right? Like we're in the middle of the session, like it makes no sense to do that. So we have since, in the last couple of years, revamped that, and we launched the Kansas Housing Advocacy Network with partners across the state, because we began to realize that we can't make change here in our region without also influencing the rest of the state. So a lot of my slides are going to provide statewide data in addition to Johnson County data, but the importance of that is that we have united to identify best practices, we have shared messaging, and the most important thing is our messaging includes practical policy recommendations that our legislators can use. And we've been really successful at stopping bad legislation from happening. And so I'll talk a little bit about that more later. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we lead Johnson County's Continuum of Care on Homelessness, the KS 505. And so I've got a handout that explains what the COC is, so I won't spend a lot of time going into that. And I've got a couple of other handouts as well. But needless to say, we have a footprint in the housing space, and we probably will forever. So.
Okay. Christy, do you want to, start on those slides and talk a little bit about the big picture data that you see?
So no shock to anybody, right? When Megan was talking about the housing continuum, we have gaps in that continuum. So you can see that KHRC, the Kansas Housing Research Corporation, conducted a housing study similar to what we did in Johnson County. And they found that we are missing quite a lot of housing. We've got, for instance, we have folks who are aging, who have no place to downsize, that will also downsize their costs. We have limited supply of affordable housing. We are seeing, record inflation, not just in terms of housing costs, but in terms of all costs. High interest rates currently. And if you want to switch to the next slide. Is it up there? Yeah. So across the state of Kansas, about 28% of the population is considered low income. That's 15% for Johnson County. 15% of Johnson Countyans are considered low income. Across the state of Kansas, we only have 41 affordable homes for every 100 households that need them. That includes Johnson County, right, within that mix. And the next one, this is one, we have I'll send the link out after this presentation is over, but we have a fact sheet that we released recently looking at the change in home prices. And if you look at the top one, that's Johnson County. And in 2018, almost 60% of the homes in Johnson County were valued at $300,000 or less, almost 60%. 5 years later, that has dropped to just over a quarter. In the meantime, we've seen homes valued at $500,000 or more than double. And so what we're seeing is the disappearance of what we would call affordable. And I mean, by the way, folks who are living at low income levels, I don't think would even call a $300,000 home affordable, right? And so we can see a similar change in the state as a whole. So we're not just seeing this in Johnson County, we're seeing it across the state. So whether you're living in Garden City or Olathe, you are experiencing this trend where we are seeing the disappearance of homes that are affordable. By the way, the Kansas pie chart is for homes that are valued at $200,000 or less. So you can go to the next slide. And then Megan talked about housing cost burden. And when we talk about housing cost burden, it's important to think about when you are struggling, the number one thing that you are going to try to do is keep a roof over your head, right? You are going to keep a roof over your head and everything else is up for grabs. So if you are spending 30% or more of your income on housing, you are struggling to save for an emergency. We know that about half of all Americans could not cover a $400 emergency. So if I'm paying this much for my housing costs, it's a struggle for me to save for emergencies. It's a struggle for me to save for retirement. It's a struggle for me to save for a down payment if I want to buy a home, right? We've seen so many developments, and I'm sure John will talk about this, but we've seen so many developments come up in Johnson County that are really high-end, expensive apartments, and they're primarily all full. And what that tells me is not that, oh, people can totally afford this. What it tells me is that people are affording this and they're giving up a lot of other things to be able to do that because that's what's available. And so you can see what the percentages look like. Here in Johnson County, 40% of our renters are housing cost burdened, and 20% of our homeowners are also housing cost burdened. And you can see similar numbers across the state of Kansas. So this is a statewide look, and again, I'll make sure that you get these slides, but this is a statewide look. So what you're seeing up here are 5 occupational categories. These are the top 5 in terms of the number of jobs, occupational categories across the state of Kansas. So about 660,000 jobs, right? So we looked at these jobs and we looked at the median wage and we compared it to median housing costs across the state of Kansas. And we kind of set a point, like what could people afford to pay and not be housing cost burdened? So what this slide looks at is like, what's the threshold for what they could afford to pay and not be cost burdened in their housing? And you can see across the board, almost none of those categories can afford rental properties that would not leave them housing cost burdened. And so it's important for us to think about not just, everybody should be able to afford to live where they work, but it's also important for us to think about the fact that we cannot continue to grow and thrive economically as a state or as a county, as a community, if we don't also have places for people to live. There's a saying that that homes are where jobs go to sleep at night, and that's true. We can't continue to grow and thrive if we don't have places for people to live.
Am I on? Thanks. So I'm going to invite John to join the conversation and just say, what do we need affordable housing, or do we just need many more homes? And what can be done locally to increase the number of houses being built?
We need everything. The part of the problem, the slide has the next slide, if you go to that. Okay, so I pulled this one up. I apologize, my slides are going to be snippets of things and studies that I've done. I don't know if this works, but one of the things that is interesting to know, well, there we go, is if you look from 2017 to 2024, this is the gross number of permits or buildings that have been done per year. And you can see starting in 2017, we've gone from, 8621 all the way down to 5220. So at some points of 2007, 2008, that was at 12,000. Now, that may have been too much with what was happening in the market, but at the same time, you're seeing a reduction in housing, and that's all kinds. That's, single-family homes, so that's lot homes, and then multifamily, and you can see there's a little bit more dynamic numbers because people, when you build 250 units or 350 units on one project, it'll make this a little bit high and low per year, but you can kind of see the net numbers on the right. So yeah, we need more housing, and I think some of the things that you need to kind of look at is not only what you build, but where you build it, and that's one of the most challenging things. If you go to the next slide. So I'll try to be quick about this. This is a piece of a study that I did that looks at the amount of, what am I doing? Okay, so it looks the amount of AMI, or the area median income of 80% and 50% and things of that sort. And then you look at, what I did on this study is look at what those housing costs, and these were averages for Kansas City Metro. So what this did in the study is looked at how much income people had per month, and then looked at the requirements to live in our society is per month, and you can start to see when you hit 50% AMI, you are starting to get in the red. Below that, you're in the red. So what was occurring to me is, this is what I did during COVID. So I'm a nerd, I know, but the point I'm getting at is that it occurred to me that's why you see general insurance, discount insurance, and things like that, because there's a population here that cannot live and be expected to live with the costs of food, rent, housing, car, insurance, and everything else that goes with that on the wages that they make. Okay, so the point I was making is that we have an area in here, and one of the things that really it comes down to is, if you were going to break down this whole big spider web and complexity of all these things that go into housing and just living and what we do, it comes down to me, comes down to housing, transportation, and jobs. Where you pick your head up, how you get to work through transportation and jobs. Those are the three things that people are doing, most people are doing every day. And housing, because of the restriction, as it continues that last slide, as we have less and less housing that's built through lots of different processes, we end up with less housing. We have a pressurization of the housing market, and those prices go up. It's market rate, right? So what you need to look at is, with housing and transportation costs, in Kansas City has a very high combined number. It's somewhere around 56 to 58% gross income. And that's higher than a lot of other cities, and we drive more. We have more highway miles and everything else. As an outcome of that, we have more CO2, things like that, because of all the drive miles. So when you look at housing, you need to look at where it is. So in the cases I'm gonna kind of look at, or at least discuss, is if you build affordable housing 40 miles away from your work, you haven't really created affordable housing. Okay, you created a lower housing cost. You know, there's drive till you qualify idea, and then you've created a much higher transportation cost. Well, when you combine it, you have to have, you know, some relationship there. So anyway, that's just an idea, just to show people kind of what happens to this lower income, and that's why as you go lower, you're getting 30% of housing burden, but I bet you anything, you've got people at 40% AMI that are spending 40% of their gross income, and because cars cost similar, gas costs similar, all those kinds of standards, as you have less and less income, those proportions get up. So you might have people spending 60, 65% of their income proportionally of the gross income for transportation and housing. Okay, so it's just something to keep in mind.
All right. Do we want to tackle this idea of density and land use? You mentioned sort of where we build housing, but I think it's worth pointing out that cities have a huge role to play in the types of housing that is built. They deal with all of the sort of structuring of what kind of homes or what kind of businesses can go where in a city. And so that also plays into what you're talking about, is sort of centering the homes where the jobs are, and how affordable they may or may not be. So do you want to kind of tackle some land use and density issues, and then maybe you can follow up?
Sure. So the reason I put this slide is I'm on the Johnson County Transit Council. So we're going right through right now the design or the redesign to make the most out of the transit system. Buses getting down to 15-minute to 30-minute stops, which all of a sudden actually makes transit start working, you know. So that's the new map, and you can see that's the northeast of Johnson County. So one of the things about that is, if you were going to look at the income and you're trying to reduce the amount of housing or the housing burden and the transit burden, that if you could take a portion of your gross income and take bus or public transportation, that becomes then a reduction of your spent income. So it starts changing the model of what you're doing. So the other thing that happens is, if there is the argument and the model, I think, needs to be that we need to build around the areas that support transit and support the ridership to help the people who are lower income, and anybody who wants to ride the bus can do that. And the areas in which that we need to have density to support transit is between 7 and 12 units per acre for about 2,000 feet of each side of that transit corridor. So it's a walkable, 2,000 feet is something like 10, 15-minute walk. So the idea is that if we could start supporting transit by higher numbers of units for people to use the transit, and those people then have lower cost burden on transportation, it's kind of a win-win. Right now, we're spending money on transportation, and we're subsidizing transportation. We're subsidizing a lot on cars. watching my language. So the idea is that the housing is part of it. So in a way, if your housing price went from 30% or up to 40%, but then your transit went from 35% down to 15%, it's a net gain. Okay, so we have to kind of think about those things, those relationships.
I think one of the interesting things to point out about this particular map is that Quivira and 75th Street is probably some of the most affordable housing in this spot that you've got highlighted here. But this map also contains some of the most expensive housing that you'll find in Johnson County. So I think when we think about density, you know, as you go down that I-35 corridor south and west, the core of Olathe, there are a lot of other areas that open up into more affordable options for people. So I think transit is definitely a piece of it, but there's also kind of an idea of where do we already have naturally occurring affordable housing. Christy, do you want to talk a little bit about the potential for zoning changes or even density?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the policy recommendations that we have put forward as CAN is to focus on rehabilitation, but also to focus on how we build and opening up options for people to own different kinds of homes. For instance, accessory dwelling units, right? Granny flats. This would be a great option for us to be able to increase housing. So we would not only provide a affordable housing option for somebody. It could be a relative, it could be a student, it could be, you know, a young person, it could be anybody, but it also provides passive income for whoever has that particular property on their lot. So that is something that could help. I think that there's a preemptive law in the state of Kansas that prevents us from mandating that new developments include a portion of those units to be affordable, right? So we as a community can't say like, oh, awesome, build this, but you need to make sure that 10% of them are going to be affordable to somebody who is making 60% AMI. We can't do that. We can offer tax credits, but they're temporary, right? Like they wear off after a period of time. And so there are definitely things that we could be doing that would make things easier for people to develop. And John probably has a lot more to say about that than I do.
Yeah, and I may actually jump in. Would you go to slide 17, please? So the county has also recognized some of this and taken action to maintain our housing stock. So I mentioned the first two programs as services that our Housing Services Division has offered for a long time, but they basically take federal grant funds that come in and they offer a minor home repair program to folks limited income, so 80% of that area median income or below. And that is, just to give you an idea, about $62,400 for a single person and $71,300 for a household of two people. So it's a lot different if you're used to hearing like federal poverty line or some of these other benchmarks that a lot of human services programs work off of. The housing tends to be a little bit different and those incomes are higher. Anyhow, the minor home repair covers health, safety, and accessibility improvements up to $10,000. And then our home rehabilitation program does critical repairs. So you see a lot of roofs or siding, windows, those sorts of things. At about $40,000. But the trick with this one, there's a home valuation cap of $304,000, and that's a federal standard. And as Christy talked about, the number of those homes that qualify just keeps going down, down, down. So it makes it hard to even use the resources that we do have access to for these programs because just not a lot of people qualify. So knowing that, the board started the home preservation program just this year. We are partnering with Habitat for Humanity of Kansas City and Metro Lutheran Ministries. And these are still income restricted programs that do home repair, so HVAC, driveway repair, installing accessibility handles or grab bars in your bathroom or handrails up the stairs. But these are repairs up to $8,000, and really the intention here is also to test a little bit on some innovations, to see what else could potentially be done with these programs to make them a little bit easier to use and to take advantage of to maintain our affordable housing stock that does exist in Johnson County. And Christy mentioned sending these slides around. These are hyperlinks, so if you actually click on the title in these slides, it would take you to the program page if you know someone or want to see if you might be eligible for a program like this. So John, is there anything else? We can maybe go to slide 18.
Well, if you go back up to the, let's see, that slide. What was, okay, we're here. Okay, just really quick.
Slide 14.
Slide 14. So what this is showing is that if you say you were able to save by taking bus transportation, and you were able to cut back on your insurance, say you drove less than 5,000 miles or something a year, and you could get a reduction on your insurance, you could live close to transportation, and say out of the amount of money that you pay for a car, if we're talking 30 up to 40% of your AMI on that, or your gross income on that, say you could save $400. Okay, a month by doing that. And that includes spending time using Uber. We have these systems in place, especially in Northeast Johnson County. What this slide shows is that for $400 a month, now I'm running through, this is an older one, so I'm running through probably a 5.5% interest rate on 30 years. That $400 a month is equal to, is that $68,000? That's a buying power, okay? So having to think about where housing is compared to what you're spending on transportation is a loss, all right? There's nothing that you're getting back from transportation except the getting to work. But in housing, if you could buy something, you're buying in the equity, you're buying into a permanent housing, that $400 goes a long way in purchasing. Okay, so the idea is that if we could build more housing and more products, and then that market actually helps, builders want to build and sell at the best numbers they can to still make a profit. It's a business. But if they start competing, because there's more things in the market, you start to have potentially some leveling off, but we're so far behind with housing units, that's going to take a while. But the point of the transportation is that what you could allocate that money for instead of transportation into housing. It's just it's the housing plus transportation number, if you go to the next slide. So one of the biggest problems as I did this slide, realized that the issue is what comes out of this process is single family homes and multifamily at the bottom, top and bottom. All the missing middle does not come in. So what you see in red are the deal killers for each one of these types of projects, and this is my experience. Where you have it, so it's not just city, it's not like a city planning thing only, it's Water One, Johnson County Wastewater, Public Works, Fire Department's a big one. You cannot build these things. So this is hurting the restriction of what you can do. Zoning, densities, and I'll make one last point and then we can skip down. Understanding that Overland Park, with all the buildings that have been built and all the apartments down there, the number of units that need to be built along from 75th to 95th to support transit is another 3,000 units just in that corridor, addition to what's already there. So you start to understand the scale and the size to support transit. It just gives you an idea. So if you go to the next slide, this is something that Overland Park did in their forward OP. Great slide. So what this shows is what is the value, this is one of our projects, what is the value of tax to the city to pay for all the things they need to, for everything they need to run. And you start seeing like even a smaller project driving $2.1 million a year in taxes, land taxes. So you start looking at other things that they did, for other housing, other retail, things of that sort, and you start to see, what I can't see all this, some of the strip retail, housing, and you're 10 to 20 times. So if we built along corridors, transit corridors, just within those corridors, not the best land all the time, not the prettiest places, but if we could make some better investments in that, the benefits to the cities would be huge. And if we have those incomes coming into the cities, some of that could go into supporting housing, supportive housing incomes, where that could go into kind of our own tax credits, supporting people of lower incomes to help those types of environments. So the more we can build, the more opportunity we have to put some of that money into other things. And what the county and everybody is doing is great. It needs to be there, but they need money to support those systems. And I think if we take a look at how that could be done, it would help everybody.
Christy, do you want to pick up a little bit on the density piece that I think John is bringing up here? Just this idea that the more compact, the more people and units you can put in a single space of land, the more then the city has revenue to provide services and potentially keep that tax burden at a reasonable level and not have to keep increasing it to take services further and further and further out.
I'm on board with density, and I think I appreciate everything that John is saying, but when I think about housing solutions, we can't just do one thing, and I think that's kind of where we end up upsetting people, and we get the not in my backyard folks popping up. Solving the affordable housing problem that we have now, there's not one thing that we have to do, right? There's lots of things that we have to do. We need housing actually at all price points, not just lower income or affordable price points. And so I think that density is a path and one of the things that we should definitely be pursuing, but I think that it's not possible for that to be the one path. I think that there has to be a lot of different options and a lot of different things that people find palatable. Not everybody wants to live in a high density area, right? Not everybody wants to have that particular, not everybody wants to take public transit, even though we can all agree that it's better for us and it is more affordable in the long run for our communities and, would free up other tax dollars for other things. But I think that there are other solutions that we have to think about as well. I think that we see some of our communities doing that. John mentioned Framework OP, Overland Park's comprehensive plan. And one of the things that Overland Park has tried to do is something they're calling pattern zoning, where they have a number of housing developments. I think they're single and two-family homes. There's, I want to say, 24 different designs that a developer can pull off the shelf and just sail through the planning process. And that's an approach, right? Like that's something that they're trying to make it a little bit cheaper to develop something, make it a little bit faster, streamline the process a little bit more. That's one thing, right, that they're trying. I think that what we're seeing with Habitat in Olathe is another thing that we're trying. The Community Land Trust, where they are pursuing a model where the home itself becomes affordable in perpetuity, right? And so that is another thing that we're trying. ADUs, granny flats, that could be another thing that we're trying. So I think that it's a puzzle and there are lots of different pieces and some of the pieces are bigger and some of the pieces are smaller, but I think that there are lots of things that we have to try. I think that John's conversation about transit and density and where we need to build housing is spot on. I think it's a tough sell for a lot of people. And I think that we can get there. I think it's going to take a long time.
Mm-hmm. So tell us where we go from here. What's
What
next?
slide number is that?
Can I say,
Yeah.
when I talk about density, I'm not talking about that high density housing is the only thing. The view was 90 units to the acre, high, right? But that doesn't mean that we're saying that a fourplex or a duplex or any other type of multifamily, if you start doing those are probably in the 6 to 8 units per acre. So if we're trying to support transit at 7 to 12, those type of small lot developments, even 40-foot or 50-foot lots, will support that transit. Now, it might not, if it's within that 2,000 feet of transit, you can have almost every housing type you want. It just is allowing those housing types to be built, and that's the problem. It's incredibly hard to build those types of things.
Can you tell us why?
Well, I said it's zoning, it's planning, it's parking requirements, it's the amount of land that you have to. We're not looking at runoff and storm anymore as a community idea. So every property is required to hold all of their water on their property. So the problem with that is that you then have to have more green space and you lose density for that, instead of looking at stormwater as a community type of base where everybody pays into it, and then there is a good, a lot of cities do parks, like 119th and Tomahawk Parkway, all those ball fields, that's all detention. If you go, I used to coach lacrosse, we go down there, there's just like water everywhere. That is a huge detention basin that they have public parks in. So we need to think about how we deal with this, and that's a whole lot better benefit to the community than trying to, let's look at that instead of putting $500,000 of underground detention under a building. That, you know what I'm saying? So there's a benefit, and we have to go through those processes. So that's another thing. Fire department, how far you can go with a hose, it's limited to 150 feet. So like downtown Overland Park, you could never build today because it violates all the rules. So just some ideas, there's a plethora of things. It's Water One, it's Johnson County wastewater and everything else. It's just post-1950s World War II, we changed how we build. So even though we want to build the downtown cute walkable neighborhoods, those rules have been ingrained for 70 years, and it's very hard to have that conversation back.
So it sounds like we need to think differently about how we build, probably in partnership with our cities.
Yeah. The cities say, we want this, and you say, well, here it is. Well, you can't do that.
Or you can build it, but it costs $1 million to move
No,
into.
you can't build it. You just can't build it
at all. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Anything else on that, or do you want to move to where we go from here?
We can do this. I'll go through these a little bit quickly. So these are, when we put together the Kansas Housing Advocacy Network, we did a lot of research looking at what other states were doing. We looked at what was going on in our community. We looked at what legislation was kind of bubbling up. And we wanted to hone our advocacy message and make it simple for us to communicate to our legislators. So we kept it to 3 things, right? We kept it to these 3 things: build and maintain housing where Kansans need it, act upstream to keep Kansans housed, and then stabilize Kansas experiencing homelessness. You can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we focused on this legislative session, sadly, we almost never get to promote a bill. We're often trying to stop things from happening. The Affordable Housing Tax Credit has been a great tool for developing homes across the state of Kansas. In fact, it was a 400% increase in homes that were built using the Affordable Housing Tax Credit. This legislative session, the legislation was looking at eliminating the Affordable Housing Tax Credit altogether. They're going to do that. We can keep it for the rest of this year at the 9% match, which is a match to the low housing income tax credit, and then it will phase out through 2028 with an $8.8 million cap, so it's not going to last until 2028. I bring this up not to bum people out, but I bring it up to put it on your radar for the next legislative session. If they want to come back and address this to kill it again, we're really going to need people to speak up about it and speak about why it's so important. And, not just, again, why it's so important for people who need homes, but we cannot continue to grow and thrive economically if we are not going to put the funds and the resources behind creating the housing that we need in our communities. You can go to the next one. Oh, wait.
I just wanted to follow up on that just a little bit too, because the Board of County Commissioners right now is having an interesting conversation about basically the county's ability to raise revenue. We're fairly limited by state statute in what they can go do, and they hear residents say, we need more affordable housing. Well, that also equates to dollars. But we are very limited in how that may work. So thinking about retaining tools that are out there as a foundation, frankly, to build on from a different taxing jurisdiction, it's important to sort of think holistically when you talk about how we build more affordable housing in the state. It can't be all on one local entity or municipal government. it's simply too expensive, and as John pointed out, it's really too complex to just park with one entity. So we need to be thinking a little bit bigger picture about how these resources get into our communities.
Support what they're doing, because people listen to the constituents and everything else, and that's really important. For the low-income housing tax credit, understand that is a market-driven tax credit. That is not that subsidy. The way that works, I'd like to just explain. If Kiewit or H&R Block or somebody wants to offset their tax burden, they can buy these tax credits. They buy them. It's syndicated, and they will put in bids to get, say, pay 92 cents on the dollar for the tax credit. So that money is, they are buying it to offset their tax burden, but then that money goes into affordable housing. So the better economically those companies, or we do as a whole, then those tax credit costs, they go down to like 72 cents all the way up to 92 cents, $100 for dollar, depending on how well they've done. But that is a market-driven product. So it's one of the best things out there, because it's driven locally, or I guess nationally, whoever wants to buy the tax credits.
And it's worth noting again that those low-income housing tax credits are something that the federal government puts out there. The affordable housing tax credit that Christy was mentioning was a state match to those LIHTC dollars. So again, when I say it takes multiple stakeholders to make these resources real in our community, it's true. Can we go to slide?
Hold 1 second.
Yeah.
What I will also say about the affordable housing tax credit, and that's something that take heart, because the legislators who wanted to kill this credit thought it would be a walk in the park, and it was not. And that is because we mobilize, we provide clear talking points, we educate our legislators throughout the year, not just when we're looking at the session, so that when they get into the session, they know what they're talking about and they know what they're voting on. So did we win completely? No, but it was way harder than they thought it was going to be to get rid of the credit.
It's due to advocates like you, so thank you for the work that you do and coming out on a Saturday morning. Where are we?
We can do the...
Skip my last
Okay.
slides, but it does go to some of what you're talking about.
Sorry, what number do you want to be on? We're all lost up
I
here.
know we're all lost now on what our slides are. The one that says increasing property rights, what one is it?
24.
24. I'll just stop on this one for just a minute. Again, thinking about how we can expand property rights. I'm going to mention again ADUs, changing the way that we approach planning and zoning, like John is talking about. And if you go to the next one. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of private equity firms buying up houses, buying up apartments in our community, a lot. And what that does, it's detrimental for a couple of reasons. One, if I go in and decide, for instance, that I want to buy a rental property on my street, I'm buying a rental property on my street and I'm living in my community and I'm taking care of that property and I'm keeping an eye on it and I know what's happening in my neighborhood because I live here and I care about it. If I'm a private equity firm, I really don't care. I don't care who's living there. I don't care what the yard looks like. I don't care if they maintain it. I don't care. Also, if I'm buying that like just adorable 2 or 3 bedroom, 1 garage ranch on my street, as a private equity firm, I've now taken that off the market as an affordable house that a family could potentially buy, right? And so then also if I'm an equity firm and I'm buying things up en masse, I can set the rental prices. I can change those and make them as high or as low as I want, and it doesn't matter. For me, I am actually a landlord. I own a duplex. I know what it costs to live here. I know what people are thinking about, and I'm a little bit more engaged and connected to the community, and I'm probably a little bit more empathetic than a private equity firm would be. So I just want that on people's radars as well.
Part of that, why that's become such a big model is because we have less and less housing. So the values that are being paid for now because everybody's competing for housing because there's not enough of it, keep shooting up the numbers. Now we're into like Prairie Village, you can't buy a J.C. Nichols Ranch for less than $330,000. So in part, it's the values that keep going up, that if you were going to put your money in something and have something rent from it and get a return, not only on the increased values, you've all seen it, probably between 5 and 13% or something like that in your appraisal rates, but you can also get rent from it. You can just, that's a fantastic investment as a product. So the problem is that if we don't continue to build enough housing, that becomes more and more of an investment for the big firms because they can just recapitalize it, take the money out of it, and just let it run as rent too. So it's like a twofer. They're probably making 20, 25% interest rates on these things.
Yeah. Can I ask you to go to slide 27? I do want to follow up with what Christy said about taking heart. I know sometimes you get into this issue and it just feels insurmountable. I do this every day, and sometimes it feels insurmountable to me too. But I think if we think about that continuum and we think about all of the different challenges, that also offers up a whole host of options, right, to invest in, to think about, to act creatively within. So I just want to point out a few things that the county has done in recent years around housing. So this is building new housing. There are awards underway for one-time home ARP money to go into developing affordable rental units to serve people who are experiencing homelessness. Similarly, we are funding 4 new units at the Salvation Army Family Lodge to offer transitional housing to families experiencing homelessness. And I'm probably most excited about a couple of new developments in right around the downtown Overland Park area that will serve people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and also who are mental health clients who have permanent supportive housing vouchers. So these will be new housing units that are actually being built to support these vulnerable populations in our community. Next slide. There's also been some creative action taken to invest in larger complexes. So there's a complex in Shawnee that got $1 million revolving loan, or it's a loan. And that's workforce housing. So that's anybody at 60% of AMI or below can rent these units. Similarly, there were townhomes built in Gardner that are also serving low-income populations. And then an investment made, to your point, in infrastructure, in wastewater costs for affordable housing in Olathe. The one thing, Christy touched on it just for a second, but it's worth noting, Habitat for Humanity has been a great partner in the last few years, and they actually got together with a church, the Pathways Community Church in Olathe, and the church basically gave Habitat a really good price on that land. It was enough to make the church whole and get what they needed to out of that land, but not at market rate. So then with investments from the county, from the city of Olathe, and from some other sources like grants, Habitat is building a neighborhood, 14 single-family homes that folks who are low income can go in and purchase and own. And Christy mentioned the land trust component of that is something that's really exciting to keep those in that affordable space, even after sort of that typically the investment timeline where a person has to keep that, or an investor has to keep those units affordable, falls off over time. And this is another reason why those units come out of the affordable market. So the land trust model kind of secures that in perpetuity. But we're excited about that partnership too, because it's also the vast number of stakeholders that need to come together to make these things happen. I think that project is a nice example of that. It really took a lot of different actors thinking about how to make a difference in that space. And we are very excited to see who's able to move in there and the kind of community that they create. There's also been additional funding to Habitat for Humanity to acquire more land in Johnson County so that they can kind of replicate that model over time. One more slide. And then, you know, there's there are programs and services that also need to impact folks who are vulnerable and help them maintain stable housing. So I'll just bring up two that I work closely on and am kind of excited about. But the eviction mediation program is something that the county has partnered with the district court to put mediators inside the eviction process. So rather than, we have very, very landlord-friendly laws in this state. The eviction process is extremely quick. Oftentimes it's automated. And again, that goes back to those sort of corporate landlords that really are not necessarily looking a person in the eye and understanding their situation. So that is just basically a moment in time. It's not a perfect system, but it does allow an agreement to be mediated that's binding, but tends to give tenants a chance to pay and move without there being an eviction on their record. So that's critical when they go for the next application for housing, that is not on their record anymore. The other piece that's been very exciting is a landlord incentive program. So this is really trying to encourage those mom and pop landlords to get involved in their community in a different way, to accept tenants that have housing choice vouchers. So that's a government subsidy for a portion of their rent. But basically the county gives them an incentive, a financial incentive, to lease up with that tenant. It's a little bit of a way to say, hey, try this out. See if this, these inspections, if this regulation is too much for you, or if this is maybe a program that you're willing to work with in the future. And most of our HCV tenants live in the same place for a very long time. So it does actually lead to more stability, probably for the landlord and the tenant both, because if you turn a unit over every time somebody leases up new, that can be costly as well. So,
Can I just jump in? This is a good point for me to encourage people to pay attention and be active with their advocacy. I don't know if folks saw, just yesterday I read on NPR and in the New York Times that the latest version of our federal budget seeks to eliminate over 40% of funding for HUD, eliminate housing choice vouchers, and eliminate permanent supportive housing and the continuum of care program. This would have a profound impact on homelessness and continue to burden even more the limited affordable housing that we currently have. It's not set in stone. It's a first draft. We got to reach out to our elected officials and let them know how important these funds are and how important this program is. To lose the continuum of care program, to lose permanent supportive housing, you'd be talking about people getting evicted and really having no other place to go. Folks with physical and developmental disabilities could lose their housing if this were to happen. So definitely pay attention and don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call your elected officials and let them know what's important to you in your community.
yeah, the vast majority of our voucher holders in Johnson County are elderly or disabled.
Couple of questions that I want to ask, and I also want to just let you know that Deb is going to get these slides up on our YouTube channel attached to the YouTube presentation. It will be later today or this evening, but you will have access. And Christy brought some handouts. There are some handouts back there, but all of the slides will be available on YouTube later today. So let me go into the questions, and I see there are more coming. This first question is, the higher number of homes that cost more than $500,000, why is that happening? Is it based on demand, or is it more because of the cost of materials to build costs overall increasing since 2018, especially during COVID?
So there's a couple of people who are more knowledgeable about this than I am, but the first thing I want to say about that, it is not that our homes that were formerly $300,000 have sprouted legs and walked away. They're there. They cost more today than they did before. All of those other pressures are true, but it's the same home, you're just paying twice as much for it. Do you want to?
Yeah, so coming to Hunt Midwest has been really interesting because our company has built over 7,000 lots. And in single-family development, mostly in the Northland, I have become understanding of how that process works. And it used to be that we could put a lot down and sell to a builder, because that's what that business is. We put in all the infrastructure, go through all the entitlements, things of that sort. It used to take us 6 months before we could go through entitlements to then start putting down curbs and infrastructure and things of that sort. It's now taking probably more like 18 months to 2 years. So if you just think about that one line item, you're holding land, you're taking out loans to do that types of thing. The other thing is that there have been more requirements for setbacks, green space, things of that sort. So one of the problems is the lot prices start going up because of more restrictions of what you can do with the land. The third is just materials. It's about $1,000 a foot per residential road now, all right, if not more. And that just goes into the lot development costs. So where you have cities that require 75-foot lots or something like that, for every foot that they want to have big lots, that the price just goes up. You can't divide the properties as much, the lots are bigger. So the models that we would like to use have higher density models of single family homes or different arrangements of those homes, up to 30% more units per linear foot of road. But due to some of the other requirements, you can't do that. So it's like, how do you do it? You want to be creative about it. And basically developers follow the rules. We don't, I drive people crazy at work because I'm an inventor of things because of my background in design and things, but that's not what developers do. We follow the rules the cities put out there. And right now, the rules the cities put out there is driving a $600,000+ home. And it's banking, it's loans, it's appraisals, it's all those types of things. Cost per square foot of building, what a bank will loan on a house and those kinds of things. So they have to make the houses bigger because they have to drive that cost per square foot down to be within the banking rules. So that's why you're seeing a 6,000 square foot house. They're finishing out the basements, it's cheaper square footage, brings the overall cost per square foot down. So you see things like that.
That's very interesting because your answer is basically to two of the questions that we've received. So I'm not going to ask you to answer them again, but I'm just going to let you know that I think it's framed differently. And it says if we can't require developers to build a percentage of affordable housing, can we require a percentage of profit to go to the home services program that doesn't have federal income housing limits?
So if you have a business and your business says, we do this and we need such and such return, does that mean the money just goes into the stock market and gets a return of 8%? Or how much more do you want to have for a business that builds and sells lots? I think that the issue is that we're taking social issues and trying to make it fit into the square box of the business instead of looking at it from what I was describing. If we could build around certain ways and have development that would encourage development, and then the cities could use that new tax dollars to have more flexibilities to subsidize through that, then it's not a matter of just pushing all of the requirements down, because that's why we're having less and less housing built. So with that idea, you're just going to have less and less housing built. That's what's going to happen. So that idea, in my mind, just perpetuates and makes the problem worse.
If smaller houses were built, would people and families want to buy them? Our first house was 1,200 square feet, and we were glad to have it. But today, would families want to stay in that size of a house?
I would.
Yeah, and I think if it means homeownership or paying ever increasing rents for a unit that isn't really meeting your needs, sure. I mean, and there's a lot of, Johnson County is a great example of the wealth building that's available through homeownership over time. And when people are locked out of that housing market because they can't afford to ever get into it, it has an impact.
I think it depends on what it looks like and what it feels like. right? So I think that if you have a higher density housing development that doesn't look like it is, a lot of I don't know if anybody else participated in the focus groups when Overland Park was putting together their pattern zoning options, but they gave us 3D printouts of the developments, of the plans, and the duplexes don't look like duplexes. They don't. And so I think, or a cottage court development that is attractive and has some green space and creates community. So yes, I think people would do that depending on what it feels like and what it looks like, right? If it looks like and feels like home, absolutely, right? So I think as we think about what those should look like or what they could be, we have to be creative about how they feel to people, and I think that's how you get support.
Slide 2, that's all affordable. That's what every one of those products are affordable. So I think they look good. I got to design them. I got to build them. So I got the headaches out of you design something, you actually have to build it. Yeah, that's what I learned.
How do USDA no down payment loans play into your programs? They don't.
Yeah, I would have to refresh myself on those. I think they tend to be more useful in the rural areas than they are in Johnson County. And that is another financing mechanism. There are a lot of different financing mechanisms for folks. At the end of the day, you're trying to get blood out of a turnip. Really, to afford the prices that are out there in the market today, there are only so many ways you can structure the financing before it's just too much.
It just doesn't work. Some of the other questions that were asked, I think you've answered. But I'm going to ask this one, even though you may have already answered it. How much does it cost per unit to build a low-income housing project of multifamily dwellings in Johnson County, excluding land?
Depending on how big it is, units are probably running $250,000 or more.
And John, can you follow up on that? Because the difference between an affordable unit and a market rate unit might just be the finishes that are inside that apartment. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, you still have the same 2x4s, you still have the requirements on all the insulation and the codes that are being required. I mean, really, when it comes down to, if you looked at the same square footage, say 1,000 square feet, and then you're putting in P-lam instead of quartz. I mean, okay, you have a savings of, $1,200, $1,500, $1,800 or something like that. I mean, it's not that much.
Yeah, so the challenge is, at the end of the day, those rents are, I mean, sure, if you have the quartz countertops, apparently the market will let you charge $2,500 for that apartment. But when we talk about building these things from scratch, there is a minimum price point to get in, and it's very high.
If I heard what you said, one of you said that there was a Kansas state law that says you can't require a percentage affordable housing in a project. That, I didn't know that, and I find that very interesting, because that also leads to segregation in some way, where we have some of these projects that are affordable housing, but they have to be somewhere else from other levels of housing. That bothers me. I'd like you to just comment on that a little bit.
I mean, I think that you're spot on, right? Like if I were building, say I were building a set of townhomes in one spot, and there was maybe 10 or 15% of them were set aside to be affordable, then you've got people who are from all income levels living in one place. But if I'm only going to be building affordable housing over here, now I'm putting all the people who are lower income in one spot, and that has huge implications, not just for them, but for their neighborhood, for their schools, for the services that they receive. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
I didn't know that. I think it's another place we could advocate for change. We've heard a lot today, a whole list of advocacy that's nonpartisan, that would help to make our communities better. And I want to thank our speakers for giving their Saturday morning to come here. Will you help me thank them? So Harry, our president, is going to take over now, and I think some of our speakers may hang around a little bit to talk to you. And again, the slides are going to be available on the YouTube presentation later today, and there are a few handouts back there. Thank you again very much.
Thank you very